or invisibly.
Sorry, I forgot to add a PSA at the beginning of this conversation that we do record these, and I've missed a chunk of the meeting, but I just hit record. So just acknowledging that I'm recording us. Is it time for me to switch slides, Chris, or are you good with this one for now?
Yeah, we can move on.
Okay.
So here is so right now, again, we are synthesizing the results of all of these interviews and picking out not just great quotes and information like that, but common ideas, patterns, things that we can look at for improvement. So this is just kind of an idea of some of the things and areas that we're looking at here. So like on the left hand, we have like things like provider processes. So this is how this actually is affecting how providers operate and how services are being delivered. You know, when are people needing to create these reports? How do they integrate into the flow of the actual clinical work and training? How are people actually understanding how the reporting requirements need to be met? You know, how do you use the systems? How do you understand how to answer the questions? Language and harm is where we get into the actual information of what's on these reports. So are we consistent with how we are asking these questions? Are we asking in ways that are similar to being asked by other standards or other organizations, or how data is already being collected in other systems like EHR? We want to avoid people having to make crosswalks and map some piece of information from one system to another with, you know, slightly different answers or something like that. Are we flexible with how we are allowing people to answer these questions? Are we providing the correct language? Are we using accurate terms that reflect the changes in culture? Because of course, these go back 30, 40 years. Are we allowing people and clients to express themselves fully with the options that they are allowed to input on these forms? And because we also know too, if we don't provide the correct answers and options, then people will put in something because they have to put in something, and then we'll just get bad data. Infant mental health is another thing in particular where just, you know, this is something that was not really considered at the time that these forms were created, and it creates a lot of difficulty in trying to map the specific concerns in infant health into these reports that really weren't made for it. So on the right side, we have some of the more technical and you know, data computer related sort of situations. So understanding how EHRs are related to this. So how are we better able to, how can we better implement and leverage those EHRs to take information that's already being entered into systems that providers already have and moving those into state systems without manual interventions? What are the costs involved when we make these changes to requirements in EHRs, and how can we make our decisions more intelligently to help minimize those costs? Technical considerations, a lot of that is just, okay, we are standing up our own tech systems, and there's lots of issues with those tech systems, some of which are just UI issues that just cause more friction, cause more pain, when someone has to log in multiple times a day, or when someone has to get their account reset because they haven't used the system often enough. Report consolidation is actually trying to bring all of these systems together in CCAR and day codes. And that means not just combining questions and eliminating questions, but understanding how do we connect two different mental models and make them align with each other. And then the errors is making sure that when we do have this error process, that users are submitting data and getting feedback that often happens after the fact that data has been collected, which can make things very difficult to correct the information because they have to go all the way back to a clinician and back again. So if we can integrate these systems, if we can reduce the number of errors we get and flag these errors earlier, they can get corrected quicker by the people who understand the information the best. And then data flow is making sure that we understand how the data is moving between different systems. We understand a lot of organizations, especially for day codes, end up reporting information in multiple ways. They may send information through their ASOs. Larger organizations may be dealing with multiple different ASOs and multiple arrays, and they have different systems to use there. So that's a big challenge. And then understanding what the benefit of this data is. How can we actually surface this data, provide it back to providers in a way that makes it useful, so this is not just a burden, but something that actually provides value. So we will be still doing a lot more work in analyzing this and coming up with recommendations, but these are a number of things that we have been discovering and themes that have been coming out of this amazing research work and all this great information that we have been getting from providers. And so the next step here is to finish up this synthesis step that we're currently in and start working on creating our outcomes. So creating recommendations, creating ideas of what the new systems and new data reporting instruments might look like. So then we'll be finishing that synthesis, making refinements, and we hope to have information ready to share out by early July.
Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate the update from you on admin burden research. Now I wanted to turn it over to all the providers who joined us today and see if there's anything that Chris's update brought to mind or any other questions that you have for us. Emily, please go ahead. Emily Richards, it looks like you have your hand raised if you'd like to speak out. Okay. We can take questions or comments in chat as well. And it doesn't, yeah. If you're speaking, we can't hear you. You might be muted. Okay, Emily, Elizabeth is typing. The question is if there's an ETA on when recommendations may be implemented. So I think maybe that one's for you, Chris, and I bet it's kind of a complicated answer.
Right. Yeah, that we are basically working on coming out with a multi-step plan on this. So we will definitely be looking at some things that we can implement in the short term, but definitely some of these changes will be a larger term project, especially replacing some of the older tech systems. I should say too that we are already making some of these internal changes into our systems to be better prepared to move into some better user-facing systems. But as to the timeline of that, I think I'm not sure. I think maybe if I'm not sure I can promise any particular dates on that, but I don't know if Christian has anything better to say on that.
And the question is the one that Elizabeth asked about, what is the ETA for recommendations and when they'll be implemented?
Yeah, that was a question.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Yeah, so we are in the middle of road mapping or planning for our next fiscal year. We have like rough drafts of that we came out of last week. We had a full week like heads down planning across all of our tech team. So in part, I think we're waiting for like digesting and reviewing the final recommendations from the provider admin research, determining what's next, and then putting that into our timeline. We do have funds available specifically next fiscal year, in particular related to data modernization. So I do really hope to see some significant forward movement on all of the feedback that you guys provided over the 12 months. I would love to say over the next 6 to 7 months, but I also want to give us the space to digest and process the results, meaningfully incorporate them. We're very much so trying to tie this or look at this both from the existing set of providers who are meeting these reporting requirements and how we create more space in your day to provide patient care and do less additional, I'm going to call it, reporting beyond what you need for providing quality services. And then also hope that that enables us to further expand our provider net as well. So more to come on that, but very, very much so front of mind. I do think that we should, in the next month or so, have a clear, like, specific vision for when we hope to see bits and pieces of that being rolled out. DACODs, yes, that is also on the table. Data modernization is a broader bucket of funding really meant to help us reduce provider reporting administrative burden over the next year. And Chris, I might turn it back to you so that I don't speak out of turn, but that CCAR and DACODs were intentionally both a focal point of our provider admin burden research. And we know that part of that is around streamlining or better connecting duplicative data elements, for example, between the two. I saw Chris nodding. I'm going to be quiet now.
Yes.
Before you go, Chris, can I add one other thing?
Oh, go for it.
That I think, yeah, so I do want to emphasize something else that I know Abigail, if she could be with us, but she needs to get married and needs time to go do that, as I'm sure everyone can appreciate. Is that these research efforts do not exist in a silo and are not a one-off effort. And so as we do different prototypes for different types of data collection or reporting changes could be, we're going to be engaging with the provider community again when we're doing testing on that, and what is there and what is missing, what our next steps are. We'll be engaging with you all and looking for constant touch points so that we truly are co-designing and co-creating what this future looks like throughout the next year and years to come. And so I just wanted to call that out, as even if we don't have a drop dead date, that is the intention, is that every step of the way you are with us and we are with you and we are working through this together.
Yes, thank you, Janelle. That's definitely very important to note. And yeah, so in terms of CCAR and DACODs, I think it's worth mentioning too, we are definitely looking at continuing on as much as we can from some of the valuable research and work that was done during the Compass project, even though that project failed to launch a new data portal. Particularly regarding some of the ways that we can consolidate those two forms. So that is definitely very much still likely in the cards to find a way to combine those two things together. We're still trying to figure out exactly what that looks like. It probably will look something similar to what Compass was proposing if you are following that work in the past. But then also, unlike Compass, we are trying to also make sure that we are going to be delivering improvements as we go, so that we don't have this risk of building a large project and working over a period of years and then failing to address issues and failing to create a launch product. So we're looking at ways that we can provide improvements as we go while still being mindful of not creating undue burden by creating too many changes or churn on the provider side for adapting to new systems.
Thank you, Chris. We have a couple of questions, or one comment and then one question in chat at the moment. So the comment is, this is very exciting. I don't know what the changes are and how they will impact our reporting abilities. We currently report CCAR and DACODs using a complex process to exchange data. We will continue to provide updates here. Probably the next one will come after the admin burden research synthesis has been done, and we have some outcomes that are identifiable. And then the next is a question, and that's from Elizabeth Richards asking, if possible, could Dan provide an update on MMIS or BHC&E? So Dan, I think I did see you join. If you feel comfortable giving a sentence or two, or maybe Kristen, is that possible? If no, I think we can put it as a topic for a future office hours meeting.
We can definitely provide an update. I'm just going to pause for a second to see if Dan is on. I can't see the full member list.
Yes, I'm on.
Awesome. Do you want to provide a high-level update?
Yeah, I can do that. HICPUF informed us yesterday that all of their testing on the system changes to support the project went through testing or completed testing yesterday. So that's changes to the CBMS system, changes to the interchange were pretty much completed before in terms of creating the new ASO and MSO provider types. So those systems will effectively be live here within the next couple of days when they make a system update. Because of this, the BHA program, high-level program group will be visible in CBMS. So it creates a bit of a timing issue with providers not having access to Peak Pro yet to see what individuals in Colorado may be seeing through Peak. So we're putting together a couple of one-pagers of some information and guidance on what that looks like. As far as further rollout, I know there's a lot of other discussions going on about impacts to providers, and we're taking that into consideration as we put together the plan for this coming 12 months, beginning July 1st, as a capacity building year to get these services rolled out. So more on that to come. I know those are the details you're looking for, Elizabeth, but we're still trying to put all that together while we continue to learn from what Signal's experiencing through the pilot.
And I might add, I have not read them yet, Elizabeth. So, but I think you'll be really excited to hear that draft manuals and guidance tools, for example, went like I got some in my inbox yesterday to review this week. Like so sets of like what would providers need, what would intermediaries need, what sort of guidance are we providing? So we are definitely making progress on that front. To Dan's call out earlier, we're looking at this next year as a capacity building year, and I don't know how we are going to do this. It might relate to like how we offshoot or spread out from or fan out from Signal as our initial guinea pig or pilot entity, but we will, I think, be trying to figure out in short order here who is next or first in terms of engaging with us to support from a provider perspective, testing out and using the provider enrollment tools through Peak Pro, as well as thinking about what intermediary ESO or MSO would make the most sense to go next in terms of engaging with us to continue this pilot and test kind of period and start the onboarding process. So that's right where we're at is I think a lot of good news, a lot of progress, but also attempting to take a really thoughtful or slow approach, methodical approach to how we support providers and intermediaries and all these changes.
Thank you, Kristen.
As we, sorry, Gwen, one more thought.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, we know that you'd raised some questions before about atypical crisis providers. That's still probably going to be one outstanding issue that is going to take a few months to work through with HICPUF. So I know you've had that specific question in the past, so I wanted to mention that we're definitely aware of that and still working on what that solution may look like.
Thanks, Dan. I didn't mean to rush you there. So I'm going to start with some questions from chat. So Brian Stanley was asking about specifics for the Compass project and I think this is kind of a request and ask. So it says Compass did not include ReliaTrax in its design specifications, yet 300 Colorado providers are using that EHR. Are you including ReliaTrax in your automation and connectivity requirements? And I think maybe that is best answered by you, Kristen. But my sense is that's probably that those specific requirements are pending.
I'm actively staring at the question, and I don't know, Chris, if you have anything to add to this based on initial research while I'm processing. And my answer might be, I don't know yet, but, or
Yeah.
it might be 85 more questions, to be totally honest. Chris?
Yeah, we definitely heard a lot of users using ReliaTrax. We have not worked directly with them so far, but we definitely want to we want to come up with a solution that will allow automation with as many partners as possible, and definitely that is one that is on the top of our list.
Well, I think I wrapped my head around I stared at it long enough to get my own kind of thoughts put together. So I don't know if we have our BHealth team on the line, but to me, this very much so relates to a lot of the work that we're going to do early next fiscal year. So over the next quarter, around establishing processes and standards for the ways that we share information, essentially to help people either ingest data from the BHA or receive data from the BHA or submit data to the BHA to connect in. This feels like it fits really closely into that work in particular. So for example, what sorts of standard data exchange data flows that relate to provider admin burden or CCAR and date codes are we making available or visible, and what EHR vendors or providers do we need to engage in that to make sure that those standards are easy to be responsive to?
Yeah, definitely. We want to try to move to a system where there's less of specific work with specific EHRs to do, one-off integrations, and move more to a system where we have more open standard ways of submitting data that will reduce the burden for any provider to use or any EHR system.
Thanks, Chris and Kristen. I see another question in chat asking if we have a list of EHRs that we will potentially integrate for data automation. Is that what you were addressing, Chris? And it says, asking because we're moving to a new EHR within 6 months. It would be great for us to be able to collaborate with you.
Right. So yeah, we don't have a specific list per se of anyone we're prioritizing working with. We have been collecting some information and working with understanding who the like maybe basically conducting a bit of an informal survey about the EHRs that are used, so that we do have an idea of what some of the big players are and the most commonly used ones are, which is going to be informing the way that we move forward. But we don't have we don't have anything yet to share about any particular list of EHRs that would be. I mean, we're certainly not going to attempt to preferentially support any particular EHR, but we do want to. We'll try to make sure that all the major players have a compatibility with our system.
I do wonder. I don't know if anybody has anything to chime in on this with, but that almost to me, Mohan, and I hope I'm saying your name correctly, to me that might also speak to what are good questions or ways of talking with EHR vendors around interoperability expectations to make sure that you're choosing an EHR that sets you up for success in that space. I see Wes's hand up. I would love his feedback. I hope it's directly on that.
It is. Hello. Yeah, I'm wondering if a different way to ask the question would be, if we select an electronic health record, or we have an electronic health record that supports standard FHIR resources, to what extent do you anticipate the BHA requiring elements not contained within those resources, right? Like, for me, that's sort of what it boils down to, is like, if we're just collecting data the way we would normally collect it to sort of run admissions, discharge, sort of maybe with agreed upon outcome measures that we all collect, right? But we rely on, for example, the questionnaire FHIR resource to submit the outcomes data, and the standard CCD resource to deliver to the BHA demographics data. Like, how much of what you need is covered in that? And can we, as sort of a collective of providers, just shop for electronic health records that meet these standard interoperability requirements, versus how much is it like, well, we have these block grant requirements that don't line up with the HL7 standards, and therefore we're going to need you to fill out this extra form.
I think that's a great way of framing the question. I was going to wait a moment to see, Chris, if you had any reactions or thoughts to that based on the initial research. Also knowing initial research doesn't mean we answered absolutely everything, but I think what you just described, Wes, feels absolutely like the right direction conceptually to go, and to see how far we can get with that, and still meet our federal reporting requirements. We also, I will note to this team, which really, I am not going to hang my hat on it, but I'm excited that we've made this connection. We are going to be sharing out some of the outputs of this with the feds directly, to also help, not in the short term, but the long term, hopefully, like, inform the ways that we think about those federal reporting requirements as well, when they're the thing that's constraining our ability to reduce provider admin burden.
Yes. So, yeah, as you said, I can't necessarily speak to specific technical, like, we're going to use this standard or that standard. As Christian said, this is somewhat initial research, and a lot of the research was more focused on provider burden and understanding the impacts of this organizationally, and cost-wise and time-wise on providers. So we haven't done as much in terms of coming up with concrete technical solutions. But having said that, what you said is, I think, completely in line with what we want to do, is to say, reduce the mismatch between existing systems, existing standards, data as people are already processing it in the EHRs, and the way that the state is collecting that data. So definitely that is something that we're going to look at as aggressively as we can, to say, how much can we use existing file formats like the FHIR standards, and not have, no one wants to, no one likes, FFS files and like CLD files and like these weird .ccar files to upload that, no vendor in the universe knows what this is. We would like to move things as much as possible to standard formats. FHIR is definitely one thing that we are very interested in looking at closely, and see how this can satisfy our needs.
Great. Because I think, some of it is about file format, but it's not limited to that. It's more like standard data sets too, I think.
Right.
To what extent
does you already have, and can we just reuse those data elements instead of asking you a question a little bit differently?
And I think, like, it probably is different for the providers of different sizes, right? Smaller providers in particular are going to want something where they are documenting in their sort of out of the box EHR, and how much coverage does that provide you in turn, when they submit on any sort of extract, whether it's a flat file or, API, like, on the provider burden side, I think it's really around, like, how do we have to collect the data, right? There is the sort of, like, at scale, when you're talking about, 750,000 encounters a year, like, yeah, efficiency also matters, like, but, from our clinician experience, I think all the providers would just rather, like, send you the data we're collecting normally, right?
Mhm.
I do
Yeah.
want to put to voice one thing that was sent in chat, basically agreeing with you, Wes, that EHRs are incredibly rich in data. Providers should not have to duplicate documentation where it already exists. An organization should not have to create pathways to submit data that already exists in claims data or in their EHRs. So that was one thing that I just wanted to put to voice that was chatted. And I think we can just take note of that for further research. Does anyone
Yes,
else
and-
have questions or comments? Or I just cut you off, Kristen, so please go
Oh
ahead.
no,
but-
I was gonna close off the conversation with a reminder that we're coming off the heels of both, or we're nearing the end of this initial provider admin research burden phase. We're also coming in the heels of having had a lot of heads down time, making sure that we've got strong alignment between funding and goals for this next fiscal year in terms of where we're putting our staff and our resources and our time and effort. I know that I feel very confident that everything we just talked about is at least in like broad chunks or brushstrokes on our roadmaps, and I'm really appreciative of everyone on this call providing the feedback that you did today. I think that continues to help us as we're reviewing and refining. We're putting different activities, especially across our more like interoperability analytics platform work relative to like front end data entry for providers space, right? We need to be thoughtful or cognizant of both of those. It's very helpful information as we refine where, when, how we coordinate on that work with you guys.
Yes, and again, as Christian said, this is kind of a high level, we're setting out a high level roadmap here. And then as we get into the details of figuring out, what do those backend systems look like for better EHR integrations? What does a new front end system potentially look like? Because of course, not everyone has an EHR, so we'll still need to support people who are entering information directly into BHA systems. That will have its own round of research and interviews and validation with providers to understand more detail on those areas, like what we best need to do to implement that. So like by no means is this going to be like, we're not saying done here and then just like 2 years of implementation based on this one process.
So we've had some comments in the chat just thanking us for giving an opportunity to provide feedback. And I wanted to echo what Kristen and Janelle have said, and Chris, that we all very much appreciate your feedback so that we can continue to co-create these systems. And those that we know will be replacing in the next few months or a few years, we appreciate the feedback so that we can make those as useful and easy to use as they can be. I don't see any other questions in chat right now, but if you have questions or comments or want updates about any other topic, please feel free to voice those now or type a question into chat.
I do have a question that I think just went directly to me, but there's a question about how this data and the results of this sprint will be shared out to the provider public.
Is that one you feel like you can answer, Chris? I mean, I think the broad answer is as those come in and become cohesive, we can share them out here. And I don't think we have a specific timeline, as some of it needs to be flexible enough to incorporate what your findings are. Any other comments related to that question?
Yeah, I should say that, yeah, our initial output is going to be internal to the BHA team, but as we have parts of that are ready to share with the provider community. I think this will be an avenue that some of that information comes out through in the coming months.
So I have another question in chat that says, along Wes's standards concepts, is there any thought about consistent treatment outcomes or measures? And so Brian Stanley posted that in chat, and I'm wondering, do you have any more specific questions, or just wondering generally what direction we're going for those outcomes and measures? General is fine. So have you, or do we have a course for that, Kristen, as far as consistent treatment outcomes and measured on? And this seems like it could be related back to some of the things that we gather at with CCAR and day codes.
That's where I was going to go first, is wondering if this was related to like and apologies if this is totally wrong. I'll have Chris save me in a minute. But like there's a very sizable chunk of outcome measures related to CCAR that I have to imagine were a significant component of feedback and focus for provider admin burden research, is something that we need to refine. And we know that also from Compass already. But Chris, does that feel like that aligns here?
Yeah, we've definitely had a lot of feedback about some of the questions, and particularly some of the domain rating questions that are not considered to be very valuable in those. And we are definitely looking at what we can pare down to make sure that we're not asking anything that doesn't that isn't useful in the actual clinical process.
Well, so I'm curious there, like, as someone who was involved in the initial pre-Compass data integration initiative work to align outcome measures, I think at that point we landed on a good compromise of something broadly useful, not within specific diagnoses, but rather to individual Coloradans experiencing problems with mental health and substance use disorders, right? The Burfus Healthy Days, quality of life measures, right? And it was, I think, something like 3 questions worded roughly like, in the last 30 days, how many days would you estimate you experienced problems with your mental health or something like that? And the response is a number. And there were a lot of work went into that. And you, broadly, your predecessors at the Office of Behavioral Health took in a lot of stakeholder feedback at that point. I mean, no one implemented it, so it's not important that we stick to that decision, but let's not pretend we didn't make it either, right?
I have a quick follow-up question on that. I know that we have very intentionally woven in feedback on what parts of the Compass recommendations or data model within that feel right and don't feel right. So providers, I honestly, Wes, don't feel like I'm in the weeds enough on this to know if the quality of life measures you just referenced were part of that Compass data model. Like that they made it, you know what I mean, move forward. If you're saying it preceded Compass, did they get pulled forward into Compass, or were they lost in that transition?
I mean, I think they were an agreed upon part of what we agreed, although frankly we didn't get that far with.
Okay. I mean, because we could so my hope would be to say, assuming they were pulled forward into Compass, then they were a part of something we asked questions on or assessed within the provider admin research burden assessment thing. So I wouldn't think that we would have wildly deviated from that. Instead, we would have been asking questions about what parts of this data model feel like they work well within your clinical workflow, and what parts of it are you like, gosh darn it, don't make me do that. It doesn't fit my EHR reporting model. It doesn't fit things that I ask my clients, all those sorts of things. So maybe that can be in a way that we take action on that first as a theoretical, hopeful, low-hanging fruit is that in the Compass data model. And I might pick on, I again can't see everybody, but if someone on the call knows the answer, like Troy or Sharon, you should let us know.
Yeah, so that was one of the standard assessments that we agreed upon for the Compass model. So for those of you who, there's like a core data set that talks about the demographics, and then there was several different assessments that were also, I think there was 3 or 4 different assessments that were also agreed upon at that time.
Yeah. The other piece of this I want to just sort of throw out is within the community mental health center provider community, which is not everyone that you have to answer to. There has been some discussion of like, hey, what if we just use the NOMs, since many of us have to collect that anyway for their CCBHC SAMHSA grants. And I just want to get on record as saying, I think that's a terrible idea. The NOMs is a very burdensome, even though it's a national outcomes measure, right? Like just it's rough in terms of administration. I don't think we want to move towards reporting that for every single Coloradan that seeks behavioral health services overseen by the BHA.
Thank you, Wes, and thanks, Kristen. Just opening it again, we're in our last 5 minutes of office hours. And were there any final questions or comments that anyone wanted to share before we end our meeting? So it looks like we're moving towards concluding the meeting. I have a final slide up here, just sort of reiterating where you could get more information. We made a QR code for you. So if you have a mobile device that you can take a picture of it, it should navigate you to the resources for providers page on the website. And you can look there for recording and transcript of this meeting, as well as for our slide presentation from this week. Have a good day, everyone.